And welcome to this virtual meeting of the Housing Scrutiny Commission. My name is Councillor Gavin Edwards and I'm the chair of the Housing Scrutiny Commission. Before we start the meeting, I have a few announcements to make about the meeting. This meeting will be recorded by the council and uploaded to Southwark Council's YouTube channel by tomorrow. Please note all guests will have their microphones muted when they join the meeting. You will be asked to remain on mute unless invited to speak. Please wait until I've given you permission to speak before unmuting your microphone. To ensure that this virtual meeting runs smoothly, only one individual should speak at a time. Any person speaking must be permitted to finish what they are saying without interruption. If I request that an individual stop speaking, they should do so immediately. If a member of the committee wishes to speak, could I ask them to indicate this via the chat function or to wave hands and the waved hands function, or if you're not entirely familiar with Teams, I don't personally mind if you just kind of raise your hand. I think I can see most people on my screen anyway, so don't worry about that. Please note all guests will be made attendees. After they have entered the meeting, a message should now have shown on your screen to indicate that this has been done. Bearing in mind that a recording of this meeting will be posted on the council's YouTube channel, if you are planning to speak at this meeting, you may choose to switch off your camera so that only your voice can be heard. Members of the public who are disconnected from the meeting due to technical difficulties should use the link or the dial-in instructions they were originally sent in order to return to the meeting. If a member of the committee or officer loses connection, can they please inform Fitzroy or Everton of this via email or Microsoft Teams immediately so that they can adjourn the meeting until a connection can be restored. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot or tweet public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on Southwark Council's website. And finally, in the interests of health and safety, we will be taking a 5 to 10 minute comfort break at the end of each hour. Now, tonight's session, in terms of our agenda, I was just chatting to Bill before about this. We haven't got a very heavy agenda, so it's possible we may not need to do that this evening. But if we do, of course, we will, and we'll have a comfort break as I've just set out. So moving on to this evening's business. Apologies. I've received apologies for absence from Councillor Dora Dixon-File and Chris Claridge. Are there any other apologies? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So first of all, we have to confirmation of voting members.
Sorry, Gavin.
Yes.
Apology. I wasn't quick enough off the mark. I think Councillor Nick Johnson has also emailed you with his apologies for tonight's meeting.
Oh, really? Okay. Okay. Well, that's recorded. Thank you for passing that on. Okay. Any others? Sorry. Okay, thank you. So to confirm the voting members, can voting members please indicate you are present when I call your name? So this is a bit like the school register. Obviously myself as a voting member. Councillor Hamish McCullum.
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you. Councillor Jack Buck. He doesn't seem to have joined us just yet. Okay. And Councillor John Hartley. Okay, also not here. We've got apologies from Nick and Ina Nguisa. Thank you. Okay. And are there any reserves present? Just that I should know about? No. Okay. So second item on agenda, notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. So there are no additional late items. Supplement. Yep.
For the record, I'm present. You missed my name.
Oh yeah, Bill, you weren't on my list. I can see you there, and I do apologise. It's all right. Don't worry, Evan. It's fine. It's one of those things. But Bill's ego can take it. I assure you. Okay, so supplemental agenda number 1 contains a presentation on district heating. I know that only came round today. It's a very short it's not a report, it's a presentation, and I'll be going through the presentation at the same time. But I thought it would have been helpful for you to have it ahead of the meeting as well. So, and it's now part of the kind of reports pack for the meeting as well. Item 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare an interest or dispensation in respect to any item on the agenda? I'm seeing shaking heads there. No, okay. And moving on to the minutes. So they are not going to be available until the next meeting, but there is a recording of our previous meeting already available because I've been using that for the district heating report. Okay, so moving on to item 5, which is the Aylesbury Estate District heating update. Members of the committee will recall that we had back in March a very interesting session with residents from the Aylesbury Estate and ward councillors and officers and the cabinet member to discuss the problems being experienced with district heating on the Aylesbury Estate, which are both long-term but also have become more acute recently, or acute in a different way recently as a result of further failures following some investment in a temporary solution to the heating problems that have been on the Aylesbury Estate. So we've got Paul Gathercole and John Marenghi who are attending this evening to give us an update. We have got a written report as well, which I hope members of the Commission have taken a look at. But John and Paul, however you would like to do it, it would be good if you could introduce this item and update us on the actions that have been taken since our last meeting, and to give us a picture of the current situation, and then we'll go into further questions. So Paul and John, over to you.
If it's okay, I'll make a start on this, Paul.
Okay, John, if you want to. Okay, I'm here.
So since the failure occurred on the 16th of January this year, we've at the last meeting we advised that we've had to install a temporary boiler plant on practically all the plant rooms across the estate. These units are oil fired, and the heating and hot water needs have been provided by these units since the 16th of January. The boiler house itself has been mothballed, for want of a better word. But since this time, we've done some minor works to the heating system in preparation, assuming we will get the go ahead to continue and bring the system back up to specification, bring it back up, resurrect it, let's say, and the work that needs to be done, which is specified in a report that in a gateway report that has I believe has gone through to to cabinet. We have tried to, let's say, make some adjustments to the temporary boilers to make them run more effectively. This has involved repairing some of the district heating mains, which we are utilising to transfer heat from plant room to plant room. So, for example, over at Missenden F, Missenden G, and Gayhurst, we have 3 temporary boilers down there, 3 sets of temporary boilers. Missenden F has its heat and hot water needs provided from 1 unit. Missenden G and Gayhurst share a unit. So the district heating main between the 2 plant rooms is effectively taking primary heat down to from Gayhurst to Missenden G. We had an issue last week where we had to repair part of that main, which we've done. We've also repaired a section between Wendover B and C. That's been done in preparation for the main boilers coming back online. And we've also converted the temporary boiler, with the biggest demand, that's the one at serving Latimer, to gas to save on oil costs, because we're as you can imagine, we're getting through some fuel oil to run the estate at the moment. And lastly, we've also repaired a couple of small boilers in the boiler house, which were installed back in the early 90s and were meant to provide some backup for the west of the estate, but were never used. So we've invested a small amount of money there out of our repairs budget and fitted a couple of burners, and are in the process of connecting the school to that to those units, so that we can decant the temporary boiler that's currently running the school. That's as far as we've got really with the work on the estate. We can't really proceed any further until we get the go ahead for the main works. Paul, have you got anything more you want to add on that?
Only to say it is put down in the report as well, but the independent report from the City of London surveyors is imminent. We should have that in the next couple of weeks, and follow some discussions with councillors and cabinet. My boss, Gavin Duncan, the head of acting head of engineering, has taken on consultants to do a completely independent review of the options available to us to restore the boilers or provide continuous heating to the estate. That's been turned around pretty quickly, and a meeting is taking place on the estate with the consultants on Thursday, and Gavin anticipates having their report by the start of September.
Okay, thank you. So clearly there are elements of this that are wrapped up in that independent report, and to be fair to you and to officers, to Gavin as well, that was pointed out to me before we went ahead with tonight's session. But I thought it was important that we do check in on this now, but we may mean that we need to come back in September as well. Clearly, this is a really important issue. It affects a lot of people, and I think it's important that we devote the time to it. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions, and then if I'll come to other members of the committee. When we had the session back in March, one of the things, very understandably, that came out strongly from residents on the estate who were experiencing interruptions to their heating and their hot water was the impact on their lives that it was having, particularly not having hot water. And I went back and watched the session a couple of days ago just to make sure it was fresh in my mind, the kind of things they were saying. And there was quite an elongated conversation at that point about the possibility of electric showers being put in as a temporary measure. Now, there was a question mark about electric load. I learned a little bit about electric load that evening, and whether or not that was an issue. Equally, people were saying, well, if electric load is such an issue, why are we going around to all of these properties and handing out electric heaters as well? Could you, on that particular point, on a temporary solution for people having hot water in order to wash, could you give me an update on that? Is there anything that has been done or could be done now in the interim period in order to deal with that particular issue? I don't know if that is a better question for John or Paul.
Well, I would say with the temporary plant that we've got in place, it is not really designed to be they're low temperature boilers. When I say low temperature, they work at a flow rate of 80 degrees, and the energy center, when it was designed and how it runs on a medium temperature setup. So it supplies heating from the boiler house to the plant rooms at around 140 degrees under pressurized conditions, and there it transfers into heat exchangers where they separately heat the water, and then the water is pumped around the building. So what we've done with the temporary solution is we've simply connected those boilers to those heat exchangers in the plant rooms, and they are providing hot water. it's not ideal. They, we're constantly having to, let's say, fine tune them to get them to provide an adequate service. But we've kind of got to the stage where it is providing good hot water temperatures. We haven't really had a problem this summer. My fear is when the demand goes up in winter, that we're going to be in a situation where we'll be constantly nursing these things to provide a service. That said, nothing's impossible. It can be done. It just means that we've got to keep a very close eye on it and have a presence on the estate to make sure. And as it is, we're monitoring the temperatures daily via the BMS anyway, because thankfully, where we've got BMS in all the plant rooms, even with the temporary boilers connected to them, we can see the temperatures they're producing. Now, with regard to the electric showers, I think the subject was looked at, but what we must remember is that the estate was designed on the fact that it was to be provided with district heating. And I think the diversity in terms of the loadings in all the blocks works out at about 10 kilowatts per property, which doesn't sound a lot. But when we look at the electrical intakes in all the riser cupboards across the estate, they're about 200 kilowatts each, which means that something with a basic 9 kilowatt electric shower, if you were to install a shower in every property, and based on the fact that these showers would be used more or less at the same time when people get up and get ready for work. Sorry, Paul.
So it's only interject, John, that I was partially discussed with Michael O'Driscoll, the communal electric manager, where the feasibility they done, it couldn't be done. The lateral mains could not be able to cope with the demand from the electric shower.
That's what I'm saying. The intakes are 200, 200 amps. So you look at something like a 9.5 or 11 kilowatt domestic electric shower. Well, that would automatically draw something like 40 amps when it's running. So it's huge loads, only for very short periods of time.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is that? I must admit, I'm completely ignorant on these matters. Is that significantly higher than what the drawdown that would come from electric space heaters?
Yeah, they're 200.
So that's very little.
2,000 watts, or 2 kilowatts. So they would draw a maximum of 13 amps. And that's why you can plug them straight into a 13 amp socket. So they're no more than 2 kilowatts, which is just under 13 amps. But as you can imagine, an electric shower that's heating hot water, cold water instantly, and it's going through the mechanism and coming out the shower head. Even if it's just say for 5-10 minutes while somebody's having a shower, it can draw up to 40 amps. And bear in mind, in those electrical intakes, most of them are 200 amp heads. So it wouldn't take a lot to overload the system. That, and with other things running, say washing machines and all other sort of heavy electrical consumption items. So I think when Michael's team looked at this, they looked at the possibility of maybe upgrading the electrics on the estate, but that in itself would involve getting National Grid and possibly having to have more substations across the estate. At the moment, we've got 2, I believe. So it's not. It can be done, but what we're saying is it is actually cheaper to resurrect, fix the problems we have with the district heating system, to give it another say 10-year lease of life.
Yeah. Okay. Given the wider regeneration that's taking place.
Yes.
So just final one for me on the issue of people's hot water and the residents who spoke to us. At the moment, right now, approximately, if any, how many residents on the Aylesbury estate are either without heating or hot water?
At the moment, none. There may be a few indwelling issues. I know we had some circulation issues over at the Gayhurst block, the one that faces the Albany Road, towards the other side of it. But that's a problem with the risers. So we've done some work there in trying to clear them. I think it's probably worth noting and advising the committee that the works we intend to do will basically fix the front end of the system, i.e. the boilers, the distribution pipe work and the plant rooms. We haven't really looked at doing any of the pipe work internally in the blocks. That's still going to remain original. And that's one part of the system, even if we do this work, that we simply cannot guarantee. The pipe work, unfortunately, doesn't run in purpose-built ducts. It runs through people's properties. We've had, a number of issues with that pipe work, and when it bursts, trying to repair it, because none of it is properly sleeved. When it was built, it was simply encased in, cast into the concrete slabs as it runs through each flat. It is starting to, it has deteriorated, but that's one part of the system that we can easily maintain, because we can get to it. And with the fact that we've got a number of plant rooms across the estate, if we do have an outage, it will be limited to one particular block, or the block fed by that plant room. So we're kind of minimizing the risk, but we're not eliminating it completely. Okay. I think that's a better way to put it. Yes. It's one part of the system that you will just cost far too much to upgrade at this stage.
Okay, it's helpful, and it actually will help inform something we're going to be discussing a little bit later as well. I wanted to also ask you about the independent review. Yes. That's I suppose first question: who is it? Remind me that is going to be carrying that out, and just for the benefit of people watching, how quickly are we going to get the results, Paul?
So there's two ongoing at the moment. There's one that was instigated after we had the issue with the boilers in January, and that is the City of London surveyors. They look after communal heating, a lot of public buildings, so they've got a wide experience, and they're a lot of information. They're doing a review on what actually happened and how we got to the stage we're at now. So that's completely independent and was instigated, I believe, by Michael Score and Councillor Williams. So that's in place, that's in depth, and that's going now. The other independent review is about the options that we've put forward about how to proceed and go forward. And that's gone to a company called Waterman's, who I believe were the winning bidder for the tender for professional technical services to the council. So there are consultants that will give us services such as mechanical engineering, architectural, and independent review, and give us advice before we spend money across the council. And this is a piece of work they've turned around pretty quickly and started to do. The first site visit is actually on Thursday with one of my inspectors.
Okay. So look, I think there's a recognition, isn't there, that in dealing with these historic problems on the Aylesbury estate, and in engaging with the residents of the Aylesbury estate, we're dealing with a group of people who are very understandably have experienced lots and lots of delays in their dealings with the council, and their general experience of dealing with the council is often for particularly bigger changes on the estate to take a long time, and sometimes for even when they have waited a long time, when they happen, things don't always go to plan as well. And so understanding, we saw this in the session that we had in March. There was a lot of cynicism and a lot of distrust of the council, and I frankly I don't blame the residents for feeling that way. With this independent review, specifically the one on the options for the solution now moving forward, how quickly, in terms of getting the results of that and then the council moving ahead with acting to kind of action some of those, whatever option we go with, how quickly do you think that will happen? Paul?
Sorry, John. Firstly, once we get the report, which is due at the start of September, according to Gavin, the first week in September, once we get that report, some of the works we can start immediately in the boiler house. We can literally start that immediately.
Okay.
It will be in two main stages. To simplify, it'll be in two main stages. One will be reinstating the boiler house. We will be leaving the temporary boilers on site but decommissioned once we get the boiler house up and running, because the second stage will be refurbishment of the plant rooms, which John can give you a bit more technical detail on. So it's in two stages. Some can start immediately. And John, if you could give us a timescale to get the boiler house up and running, or rough timescale, then after that it would be the plant rooms, which would be that would take time. We would be able to deliver heating, but that would take time to go to tender and get prices, and we don't anticipate that being done prior to next winter.
Okay.
Not this winter, coming next winter, winter 2021.
Okay, that at least gives us a picture of the kind of timescales we're looking at. John, did you want to say anything more about that?
Yes, I think when we've looked at this, obviously I've been working closely with the City of London surveyors and giving them all the information and what we've spent over the last 10 years on the plant. Obviously our repair costs have been quite high because most of the plant has long exceeded its service life. The one major renewal we did do was the underground heating mains. But in terms of what we're looking to do longer term, obviously we've now no longer have to supply heat to Bradnam, Chiltern and Chartridge, because that part of the estate has been redeveloped or is being redeveloped. So the demand from what the original load on the system has gone down by a third. So it's our intention to downscale the number of boilers we need in the boiler house. We've at the moment we've got 4, and what we want to do is reduce that to 3, but to ensure that we've got 3 very robust units there, because we can hold the estate on 2 of those boilers because of their size. It's also our intention to slightly redesign in the plant rooms so that we can lower the primary temperatures, which will make maintenance a lot easier and less costly, because on a medium temperature system it requires a lot more maintenance. Won't go into too much detail, but that's what we intend doing. Okay,
that's helpful. I'm going to stop there because I've got a couple of other questions, but I'm going to stop there for now. Other members of the committee, do you have any questions for John or Paul? I can't see Hamish at the moment, I'm afraid. Hamish, if you're Ina, I can see you indicating. There you go. None from you, Hamish. Okay, Ina, over to you.
Am I right saying that the boiler issues, the district heating presented in this meeting, is related to a few months back to the presentation with the document of how is going to be addressed the district heating in the council in the next 5 years? Are the issues related?
That's it. That's it. We're coming on to discuss that at the next item.
Okay.
Ina. So
Okay.
we're talking specifically about the Aylesbury estate at the moment, but in the next item, I'm going to talk a little bit about our district heating scrutiny. So yeah.
I understand.
Okay. Although this as a case study, the Aylesbury estate and the experience of residents on the Aylesbury estate as a result of the outage they've experienced may well help to form part of our recommendations for the wider scrutiny. So I suppose there is a link.
The question if they are going to be brought into the main project and if they are online with the project. This was actually the question.
Yes, there's two. In terms of our role as a commission, we want to do two things. We want to hold the cabinet member and officers to account for actions taken in the Aylesbury estate, you know, where things have gone well and where they've not gone so well as well. So there is a piece of work for us to do in order to discreetly talk about the Aylesbury, but there is absolutely, because we're talking about district heating and because it just so happens we're currently also doing a wider scrutiny about investment and the bigger issues relating to the way the council responds to outages and all things district heating. There's no reason why we shouldn't take some of the lessons learned from this and put that into that wider piece of work as well. Does that help? Cool. Okay, great. Any other questions from members of the committee? I've got one more, if that's okay. Okay, so my final question on this is, there is a line in the written report about compensation, and you know, compensation is something that it came up when we were talking to residents of the Aylesbury. It's come up in lots of different forums when we've been talking to residents about district heating outages at the moment. I mean, it's understandable. You have put in the written report that, you know, the council is under financial pressure, that the COVID-19 outbreak has increased those pressures, and you know, so there is an issue there. However, there is, I think, a principle has been established that there are occasions on which the council is appropriate for us to provide compensation where there are significant interruptions to district heating and hot water provision in our role as a landlord and a freeholder. Now, my assumption is that, you know, that will continue irrespective of the fact that the council is currently under financial pressure. As officers of the council who are often dealing with these kind of issues, that also your understanding, there's no reason for us to expect any change in that principle. Paul?
I can tell you that at present, and since about the last 9 months, work's been going on with Richard Selly, head of customer experience, councillor, cabinet member for housing, Councillor Williams, and Michael Storer, about a revised compensation policy, because there's not really one at the moment for all residents. There's one which we're told is out of date for the tenants, and there's virtually nothing for leaseholders. So that's being reviewed at present. I can't second guess what that answer will be, but Gavin, who actually wrote this report that we've input into, he may know more than us, but nothing has been said to us yet. It has been worked on pre the pandemic. Lots of feeding's gone into that, but this could also work into the long-term view. Is if we go for the district heating strategy, long term we may be tied into compensation, depending on what type of network we do. But at present we're waiting on a decision via Richard Selly's recommendations and Michael Scorer's and I believe Councillor Williams' acceptance. Okay, so in terms of that's an ongoing piece of work, and in terms of the timing of our own work, coming back to what we were just discussing, Ina, our recommendations around compensation may be well timed for that piece of work and being able to feed into Richard Selly's review. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you, Paul. And any other points that the members of the Commission want to raise at this stage before I draw this item to a close? I'm seeing shaking heads. Paul and John, thank you for attending. I really appreciate you taking the time and for your answers. And I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon at another time. Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Okay, so I'm just going to look at time now. So we've had 35 minutes. I'm intending to just continue on if other members of the commission are okay with that. So that does bring us on to the wider district heating scrutiny. And you'll recall at our last meeting and a couple more sessions, we were talking about some other estates where there have been outages as well. I undertook to come back with a presentation at this meeting. I don't have a full draft report yet, but I'm getting closer to that point now. My intention would be for us to have another meeting of the Housing Scrutiny Commission in very early September, and for us to have a full draft, which you have had the opportunity to input into as well. Part of that will be what we're going to discuss tonight, but not only tonight. You know, I will note down the contributions you made this evening, but if there's other stuff in the meantime, please do also send that through. And then the final drafting process would be towards the end of August, and then we would have a full draft to consider at a meeting of the Commission in early September. So before I come on to the presentation, are people kind of generally okay with that as a process and timing? Is that okay? So you're nodding heads. Okay, great. So what I wanted to do tonight was to go over some of the evidence that we've collected so far, quite broad brush. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail because you've been with us whilst we've been going through this evidence, so you'll be familiar with a lot of these issues. And then look at some of the emerging themes which will feed into the recommendations. Several of you I've been on scrutiny commissions and committees with before, and you'll all recall the Housing Repairs Committee as well, the Housing Repairs Scrutiny as well, whereby I don't like to produce 72 recommendations, which, you know, many of which are very, very broad brush. I would prefer to do 8 to 10 to 12 recommendations which actually make a difference and which the Cabinet have to think very hard about in terms of whether or not they actually enact them or not. So we want our scrutiny, particularly on this issue, to have a cutting edge to it and to change things if the recommendations are followed. So I'm going to try, I've never done this before, I'm going to try and share my screen now and go to the recommendation. So I go to the presentation, which hopefully you've also been sent through as well. And then I'm going to speak to that presentation. Can I just get some thumbs up, people okay for me to do that? And then we'll go to questions and have a wider conversation afterwards. Great, thank you. Okay, so bear with me 1 second while I do this. And okay, so I'm going to go with this. Okay, can I see a thumbs up that you can see the presentation at the moment? Can people see that on their screens? Yes, excellent. Good, what a relief. Okay, so let me just get my notes. So just a reminder, first of all, of the evidence that we've gathered and the kind of things that we've done and the people that we've engaged with there. So we got all the way back to the start of the municipal year. We had quite a long session, a formal interview with the Cabinet member, which was transcribed as well, which kind of was a good introduction session. We also, on that same evening, spoke with officers who more focused on the response when there are outages. And obviously events over the past year have actually helped in kind of informing our view of the contributions that they made as well. That was also transcribed. We then at the next session had a really excellent presentation from Tom Vosper, which gave us a picture about the investment programme and actually the direction the council is intending to go in terms of developing new heat networks and, for example, the extension of Selchip. Since then, I've also been engaged in some informal discussions with officers, numerous email exchanges where, as the evidence has been collected, I've been asking questions to try and get a bit more detail about those things. Bringing us right up to date, we've had case studies about what has happened with outages on the Aylesbury, on the Brandon and the Wyndham estates, all of which are kind of live issues currently this year. So obviously very regrettable that those things happened for people living on those estates. but actually, you know, it's been useful information for us in terms of identifying what those major problems are, because we've been able to look at them in real time. Then I've got now the notes from the tenant engagement meetings that the council itself has been having with tenants as well, and they're really useful. And as far as I understand, there's absolutely no problem with me sharing those notes as well. So if anybody wants them, I can forward those on to you as well. They're a good summary of the kind of contributions that tenants were making about district heating when the council went direct to them and asked them for their views on these issues. And we've had really good engagement with SGTO as well. They've provided me now with 2 dossiers, the most recent of which is called Keeping the Pressure On. Very, I'm sure the pun is intended. But that has not only has that given us information about the kind of pre-pandemic situation with district heating, there's been some particular issues that have come out as a result of lockdown as well, and they've given me another document as well, which gives their feedback on council services and district heating more generally. So the way I'm intending to structure the report in the kind of very sketchy draft that I've done so far is for us to have recommendations in 3 main areas, and to try and separate these out a little bit, because they are, although linked, they are discrete issues. First of all, there's recommendations around a strategic investment, including carbon reduction, and that goes more to the kind of issues that Tom Vosper has come and spoken to us about twice now. That bigger investment programme going all the way back to the cabinet paper in July 2019. Secondly, there's the repairs and planned maintenance, and I'll come to that on the final slide and explain a little bit more about what I mean around that. And then there's recommendations about how the council responds when there are outages, because with the best will in the world, with the age and condition of the district heating and the extent of the district heating in Southwark, for now and for the next 20 years as the investment programme is rolled out and the heating systems are brought up to date, which is essentially an endless piece of work as well, because more will go out of date during that period. We are still going to have outages, and the council does need to improve the way it responds when those outages happen. So that's my kind of ideas around structure. So on the first of those, the themes around strategic investment, I mean, these are my reflections on the main issues that have come out so far. So the investment in district heating and expansion, so particularly cell chip and the heat pump network that we've heard about. So I've been asking some questions about to what extent that very long-term plan around the investment, the budget requirement from the HRA is needed in order to deliver on that, because as I say, you know, my impression of this is actually these are such big strategic investment projects that we're talking about, you know, a 20-30 year beyond programme, and I don't get the impression thus far that we have that that kind of investment in place in the same way that we would say for home buildings, for example. You know, a recognition corporately as a council that we have to make sure that that investment is in place, because in the long term, if the investment isn't in place in the budgets for the longer term, it's not going to happen. And we might say that it is, but it has to be mainstreamed into that budget process as well. The Sydenham and the Brandon estates are both currently excluded from the heat pump expansion plans, and that was kind of hinted at way back at Tom Vosper's first visit to the Commission last year. They suspected that might be the case. In the case of the Brandon, some of those issues may well be resolved independently, and that may in the future be able to become part of the heat pump project. Whereas for the Sydenham, that's not so much the case, because it's about issues to do with the aquifer and the availability of the heat for that particular estate. But I think the Commission should be thinking about how we can make recommendations to ensure that both those estates, which have been looked at very closely and which are both big estates, could be included in future investment plans. Thirdly, there is some government-funded consultancy investigation going on around district heating networks that's taking place at the moment. That's happening now, and we need to make sure that the lessons learned from that, which are taking place in Southwark, are spread more widely. So I think one of the things we'll need to do is to, as quickly as possible, get hold of the information that is being gathered via that process. We don't have it at the moment. You'll remember from the update report that we got at the last meeting that there is quite a lot of concern around the regulation of heat networks and what the government will do around the regulation of heat networks, what additional requirements will be made of councils, for example, in terms of their building and provision of heat networks. And we need to make sure that the council is engaging with Ofgem as early as possible in order to make sure that, you know, when those requirements are brought in, that we know exactly how we need to respond. Finally, on this slide, one of the other government changes that may be coming in would be around the installation and maintenance of meters. At the moment, we're doing that using consultancies. Could that be done in-house, and would that be better done in-house? Would it be cheaper and more efficient and better done in-house as well? So moving on to themes on the response to outages. I think one of the things that's come out very clearly in two of the sessions we've had so far in terms of what residents have been telling us is that often they're not claiming the compensation that other people are claiming, simply because the process of proving that they're entitled to it is so onerous. We know that there's this review going on now with Richard Selly that has been referred to this evening. Whatever that new process is, it has to be simpler than it currently is. It can't be a heavy bureaucratic exercise, because it feels like we're adding insult to injury in terms of compensation. Sometimes there is a financial element to this as well, and it's been rightly pointed out that the more money we spend on compensation, the less money we've got to spend on investment. But where it's appropriate and where it meets the criteria, then it needs to be done in a more efficient way. The text message updates for residents around progress of repairs seems to me to be, a really good idea. This is in place. We do this already, but the problem is, we were hearing from residents, lots of people don't know about it. They haven't got their appropriate details registered with the council, so people aren't getting the message. So the council need to get out there and collect those details, I would say, more proactively. And also, hearing about in the sessions we've had about elderly and vulnerable people during outages and the way that they have suffered. We need to do more in order to reach out to those residents, I would say, in order to make sure that whatever action the council can take in order to mitigate that during an outage, we do as well. And I think probably as a council, we've become better at that kind of thing over the last few months for obvious reasons. This is a discrete issue. The next point, the leisure centre washing facilities. We heard that lots of residents were saying that they were told that they would be able to use local leisure centre washing facilities when they had hot water outages, but then they weren't able to get in at the leisure centre when they turned up because the leisure centre staff hadn't been made aware of that. And that's an easy thing to fix, but we need to make sure it happens, particularly as there are lots of changes happening with our leisure centres at the moment as well. This last point is perhaps influenced in terms of the Aylesbury estate on what we've heard this evening already, but does seem to me that the kind of things that were being described at our session in March by residents of the Aylesbury should never be allowed to happen again. In terms of, we were hearing in that meeting of young people who were telling us about the massive impact on their lives it was having, that they weren't able to have proper washing facilities at home. And I thought that was shameful, and I felt ashamed as a councillor and as somebody representing Southwark Council when I was hearing about that. And we need to look into that a little bit more and come up with recommendations to make sure that that kind of thing never happens again. And finally, Sorry, it's a bit noisy next to me, so hopefully people can still hear me okay. If you go all the way back to the July 2019 report, we heard that the council was going to investigate ways in which the private sector could potentially play a role investing in the council's networks, providing operational maintenance services over a long-term contract. And this work is still in progress. And at the update report we've had recently, that was repeated, and clearly, you know, some work in good faith is taking place, which was described to us by Tom Vosper, in order to look at actually both planned maintenance and repairs. And I think there are legitimate concerns about whether or not all of the planned maintenance that the council should be expecting from our current contractors is taking place, and whether or not that's contributing to some of the problems that we've heard about. And some questions about the extent of the teeth that the council has in order to improve performance from those contractors as well. And I've been asking some questions about, you know, precisely what those arrangements are. It seems to me that actually we don't have a huge amount of purchase other than the goodwill of the contractors that are providing a service to us for repairs and planned maintenance. Now, members of this commission will know only too well that this council has had a very checkered experience in terms of dealing with private contractors over repairs issues, and I don't need to go into all of that just now. But there's some big changes happening with our repair service and with SBS properly being brought in-house now. And the question needs to be asked by this commission is how much is that work being linked up with our district heating work as well, because we don't want to repeat the mistakes that have been made with our wider repairs service on the repairs and planned maintenance of our heating network. So that's my summary of where my thinking is at. It'd be really helpful to get comments, questions, reflections from other members of the commission tonight, but also at future time as well. If you could just bear with me 1 second while I come out of the kind of shared view and then come back to the meeting proper, if you bear with me. Okay. So, who wants to go first? Ina, Hamish, Bill? Bill?
Yeah, for me, there are two things that I would like to draw out and highlight. It's the simplification of the compensation process. I think that's really important that we drill down there and get some hard recommendations, kind of like the timeline, the amount, and how you report it. So the easier is to report an outage, and the easier it is to claim. And then the stuff around repeating the mistakes in the past, I think is something important that we need to drill down, and that's around the SBS and the stuff coming in-house, and almost like a timeline of when an outage is reported, the maximum length of time it should take to fix, which is then linked to the compensation process. So it's almost, I suppose I'm thinking of a tariff. So if the outage is for 12 hours, there's a compensation. It goes up the longer the outage is out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of look into that a bit more. I can predict what the objections would be from certain quarters to that as well, particularly around situations where we know as a council we have a massively outdated heating system on a particular estate, and we know there are going to be more outages. And the council now, you could say historically it's its own fault, but now we find ourselves in a position where we know we're going to have more outages, and it's going to be difficult to limit them. But I think it's a fair challenge, Bill, and I'll look into that a bit more.
Okay, it's just that on that the last bullet point, hot water is something no resident should have to go without. You can't have that in there and then not give compensation.
Yeah.
It's pointless.
Yeah. Okay. Taking that on board. Hamish, I mean, if by the way, it would be good to know in terms of the other things that I've said. You don't need to go through them, but are people kind of generally comfortable with the direction that I'm taking there? Is that, Bill, I'll come to you first because yeah? Okay, cool.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay. And Hamish.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 points from me. One, I would just echo and fully support Bill's comments on the compensation process. I was going to make a similar suggestion. I think having a really tangible, effectively penalty to the council when a service isn't provided, which we will agree is an absolute requirement. I think actually is quite an important way to ensure that it's regarded with the utmost seriousness within the council in terms of preventing those outages from occurring in the future and addressing them when they do. The other point I would make, though, is in sort of more strategic future long-term plans. I recall, although I confess I haven't had a chance to go back and check the minutes from that meeting or any of the reports, but I recall that we did have a bit of a discussion about whether there was a way to link up with private developments in parts of the borough to get a sort of scale of economy. I don't know whether that is something that that is possible. I think it was a line of questioning that we put to the officers at that first meeting on the subject. And I suppose it's partly a question for you was whether anything had sort of been done.
You're right, Hamish. What I can do on that is, and be totally honest about this. Tom Vosper has been very, very helpful in terms of providing more information. It is quite clearly quite a technical area, district heating.
So, yeah.
And I am, as I'm going through the drafting process, I am asking him questions via email usually, and he's been quite very quick and responsive in terms of coming back to me with answers to those questions. My next set of questions that I'm going to put to him, I'll include that around linking in with private developments and where we are on that, because that is something we haven't explored too much in the meetings, but perhaps it is something that might form part of our recommendations. So let me, particularly because of the carbon reduction potential of both the heat pump network and cell chip, I'll go back and ask a little bit more about that. Brilliant. Sorry, I cut you off.
Well, I suppose just almost to conclude, then it might be that the recommendation at this stage would effectively be to conduct further investigations into that part of that possibility. But I think unless there's a very clear reason why we wouldn't at this stage, I think the reasons you've just echoed, it would be good to have something in there that at least references that line of the Commission. Okay,
thank you, Hamish. Ina, did you want to come in on any of those points, or even just indicate your general happiness with our approach so far? I think you're on mute, Ina. Ina, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I said, Gavin, it would be difficult not to be happy with your chairmanship. So I'm very happy with the document you presented. I heard a different interpretation of the compensation scheme. Hamish said that it should be a penalty. Councillor Williams in the last meeting said that he is worried that if the compensation is too high, they might not have money for something else. The point I try to make is that as a committee, we don't try to do anything else than follow the strategy of the council. And the council has a very good point in the strategy as a value of our accountability. And the accountability comes on two elements. One is the compensation element. The other one is to review every process. So every time when a compensation was paid, it has to be reviewed what was broken in the process, because otherwise they would go with the compensation and the process wouldn't change. So it has to be a post-mortem analysis on every single compensation, because this is the only way as the organization would gradually learn from experience, as if the process is not followed, if the departments are not joined, because sometimes certain departments are willing, others they are not. Some other times all the departments are willing, but they forgot to talk to each other. So there are different circumstances on different, you're laughing, Bill. I know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Even sometimes with the best willingness. You're on mute, so I can't hear you.
I'm not laughing with you, I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, so my suggestion would be going on the point of accountability, which is part of the a fundamental part of the council strategy. We could address it of the combination between compensation, as Hamish said, compensation, not necessarily penalty, but each of the cases follow of post-mortem to see how it could have been stopped and how it would have been addressed differently. Just a suggestion. Thank you so much, guys. All of you, you are knocking the head. So hopefully I said something right. Thank you, guys.
That's very helpful, Ina. Thank you. No, I think your point is very well made. And yeah, I can normally tell when Bill's agreeing or disagreeing. He was definitely agreeing. So so don't worry. Okay, that's helpful then. I'm gonna move seamlessly on then actually to the work programme, but start with the district heating as a part of that work programme. Then my suggestion is Everton, I'll speak to you after the meeting about the possibility of having another one of these meetings at very early September. I was looking at dates early and I was thinking perhaps the 2nd of September might be a possibility as well, but let's talk about that. You know, it's sometimes difficult to get new meetings in and I don't want to clash with other meetings as well. So, but we'll have a conversation of that. I think we should have one more meeting to come back and consider the full draft report. And so people can have, you know, plenty of time to look at it beforehand and give us their comments. And then we can get that report off to the cabinet ASAP. You know, it's unfortunate, obviously, Chris couldn't make it tonight, but I think Chris Claridge's contribution from SGTO is really important as well. So I think being able to talk to her directly in a public forum about the recommendations is important as well. Now, I think with the opportunity of that additional meeting, if we're able to get it in, Everton, is you know, there are several other issues that we might want to come back to as well. Class and House is the one that's at the forefront of my mind. Understandable reasons, we've not been able to come back to the report back from the people from Class and House. You recall our meeting back in March pre-lockdown, which was highly charged, very interesting meeting, in which we heard a lot about the kind of really quite distressing experience of people who are residents of Class and House, and we also heard from their landlord, Wandle. And there was some pretty, you know, again, I've been back and watched that session again, and you know, there was some, I think, sincere promises from the officers who'd newly taken over that process from Wandle to come back and talk to us and report back, and for us to hold them to account for that. And I want to be able to do that again before we finish our municipal year. So being able to do that in September, I think, would be important as well. Now, that would then allow us to complete, I think, much of our work programme that we set out earlier in the year. You know, we never made a kind of a commitment to necessarily producing reports on everything that we've looked into. I should update the committee that I did attend Cabinet the other day and put the recommendations about our broader recommendations about relationship between the council and housing associations that came out of that Class and House session, and they are currently being considered by the Cabinet, but seem to be getting a sympathetic hearing, if I'm to go by the reaction I got in the meeting as well. So I think we've made a contribution there. I think the repair stuff has been excellent. I think the sessions that we've had on new homes and other issues have been really important as well. So, but if any people have got other contributions they want to make about work programme, obviously we've got limited time left now, but happy to hear those now. Is there anything else people want to add? Hamish?
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would be very happy with the suggestion of an extra meeting in September, and I think that would be a good way to conclude those sort of open and near completed items from that work plan. I was also grateful for the officers putting together that the sort of second document, the appendix to that report, which lists all of the other topics that we've either identified in sort of written documentation at one point or another, or identified in the process of our Scrutiny Commission this year as being issues for consideration. So hopefully that can be carried forward, if you like, into the next year and ensure that there's time available. Just one slightly more wider observation, though, if I may, and I have a vague recollection of making the same point last year, so forgive me if I'm absolutely repeating myself, but I do think it is one worth making. I think we, as a, I think it's quite important to be clear about the scope of this Scrutiny Commission. You know, housing is an issue for every person in every household, regardless of tenure, and it's quite easy, I think, in any local authority, in Southwark in particular, given the prominence of council housing, to quite easily fall into the trap of just thinking about council housing when we're talking about housing. But of course, there are other forms of tenure which are just as important for those residents who do reside in them. And I suppose I just wanted to make the observation that our the sections of the report itself, so section 5 and 6, paragraphs 5 and 6 of the report, don't cover those private rental sector portfolio responsibilities, and I think it would be useful to capture them. It may not currently be a huge priority in terms of kind of prioritising what we know is a massive issue, but it certainly, I think, is something that we should be recording our recognition that it's part of the scope of this committee. And similarly, and as I say, more wider point, there are a number of other little portfolio responsibilities which relate to housing. Things like estate cleaning, which is in the environment portfolio. And I just wonder whether it might be worth as a sort of a further point or an exercise worth undertaking, and perhaps though not worth undertaking until after September, in case there's changes to the cabinet structure, which I recognise there might be in what we know is going to happen in Southwark over the next few months. But maybe worth just undertaking an exercise to really identify what all of those areas are as well, where there's overlap with other portfolio holders.
Say that was a fair point. Paragraphs 5 and 6 have been drawn from the information that I was able to gather from looking at the cabinet member portfolios and information available on the source. One of the things I have been wanting to do is for it to be clear what responsibilities each commission has. And when we re-establish the committees after Overview and Scrutiny Committee, I hope to have information for each commission so that it's clear on what they're actually responsible for. So those points are well made and taken on board.
Thank you, Everton. Yeah, thank you, Everton, and thank you, Hamish. That yes, those points are well made. Not wanting to preempt the work programme for next year, but it does seem to me that estate cleaning is potentially a very important issue, and so that might be one for us all to keep in our back pockets, depending on what occurs. I think you're right about tenure and our remit around that, and you know, we do need to be mindful of that. I would say though that we've just discussed a piece of work that we've done on housing association tenure, which is you know, something I don't think has previously been looked at as well. You know, we can, as a commission, a current commission, say actually, you know, we are prepared to look beyond the obvious in terms of council responsibility, but it's an important thing for us to keep in mind, and I hope that happens next year as well. Bill, did you want to add anything, or Ina, did you want to add anything? No. Okay. And Bill, you're okay. Good. All right. That's very helpful. And in that case, I will talk to Evan a little bit more later. Hope I haven't sprung that additional meeting on you too badly, Everton. Did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, it's not a problem to have an additional meeting. My only reservation about the 2nd of September is because of the August recess, it becomes a bit difficult to organise things in the absence of members. So that was my only reservation. But I've just looked at the calendar, and the following week, 7th to 10th of November, does bring it a bit close to Council Assembly. So you may I can understand why you want to have it in the first week, but it's just that the August recess makes it a little bit complicated. but no problem on having an additional meeting.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's really helpful. Well, in that case, then I think that kind of concludes our business for this evening. Ina, you mentioned earlier that you wanted to have a quick chat with me offline.
I sent you an email, so it's not going to be recorded, or it's better on that. So it's already sent the email. Whenever you have time.
Okay.
I really appreciate. And Everton, I appreciate as well for reminding me. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, well, in that case, I'll bring the meeting to a close. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and thanks for everybody's contributions. And stay safe, and I'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers.